Throughout history, humans have found their colors in the most unlikely of sources. Brilliant blue lapis lazuli, a source from the mines of Afghanistan, formed ultramarine. Mediterranean sea snails were crushed for a deep Tyrian purple, and I've done shorts on these before, which you may have seen. But before purple and blue, artists needed red, green, and brown, and they would find these in places you would not believe. Red came from a mineral so toxic it killed the miners who dug it. Green was so beautiful it killed the women who wore it, and brown was so morbid it was literally ground up from Egyptian mummies. And this is the story of three colors that came with a huge body count: vermilion, emerald green, and mummy brown. Let's start by pulling it all on red. Red is a nice color. Some of you may even find it to be your favorite color, and it has certainly been desired throughout history as a color that has its vibrant and its usage in paintings. And for thousands of years, there's only one way to attain the most vibrant and brilliant shade of red, which was known as vermilion. This was through the cinnabar rock. Cinnabar was mercury sulfide. It's a mineral which resembles blood stored, frozen in stasis within a stone. It was mined by the Romans, used by the Chinese, and even the Mayans would paint their tombs with it. In terms of its origins, it has been known to man and mined by us since tens of thousands of years ago, as far back as 10,000 BCE, and it would be ground up into a powder and called vermilion. But there was just one problem with cinnabar, and that's its inherent nature as mercury, not the messenger of the gods, but a dangerous neurotoxin. People mining this stuff, which was often slaves or prisoners or even Christians during the Roman persecution period, would breathe in the dust. It was a dangerous thing indeed, as it would cause tremors, hallucination, and induce madness upon those who dared to mine it. And this wouldn't just stop with the miners itself. Grinding the cinnabar itself would release mercury into the air, and so the artists who worked with it for decades would suffer the same fate, essentially losing their senses, be it their sight or their mind. They would die quite young in a gruesome fashion. Also interesting is that mercury is where the phrase mad as a hatter comes from. People who produced hats in the Victorian era would come into contact with mercury and they would be induced into madness, and by extension, the characterization of the Mad Hatter in The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland is where that all comes from. Or you may know them from the DC universe. Jarvis Tetch, the famed adversary of Batman, adopted the moniker the Mad Hatter, and he had his own goons, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So every time you see this colour projecting warmth as a perfect red in a Renaissance painting or in the cloak of a noble saint, always remember that the colour came from a mineral that killed the people who touched it. It was so toxic and it killed people in a slow, cruel, and depressing manner. It should be noted that it's not all doom and gloom, however. With the marvel of modern technology, like a lot of other materials, vermilion is now synthetically produced in an artificial manner. This means it is produced in an ethical way, and due to strict regulations from everyone's favourite friend, the European Union, painters will generally opt for the cheaper and safer option of synthetic vermilion rather than its most dangerous counterpart, the genuine article derived from the dangerous cinnabar rock. So on to the next colour, and that is emerald green, otherwise known as Scheele's green, which was invented in 1775 by German-Swedish pharmaceutical chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele. It was a chemical compound of copper and arsenic, and was created in order to produce a better green that wouldn't fade quickly like previous ones. This was a vibrant, cheap, and stable option, and by the 19th century, it was being mass produced commercially in Germany, known as emerald green. This was a colour that looked amazing under new lights, as Victorian Britain was switching towards gaslighting from candlelight. This was the right moment for it to be introduced. It was used in wallpaper, ball gowns, children's toys, book bindings, artificial flowers, and even more surprisingly, even food colouring. The green was such a bright colour and had such a natural appearance to it that people wanted to bring the nature from outside into their own homes, and that was the real appeal of the colour. The only issue is that arsenic is a cumulative neurotoxin. It's a material that slowly builds up in the body, slowly compounding over time. So when the wallpaper got damp, it would release arsenic gas into the room. Whether that dampness came from steam heating, rain, or general humidity. There's also the real danger that women who wore gowns of this colour would, via sweating, cause that arsenic to be absorbed into the skin. And that would cause catastrophic events. Rather than tell you the gory details, I'd let you imagine the plight of arsenic within the body. The British Medical Journal did write that a woman in such a dress carried within her skirts poison enough to slay the whole of the admirers she may meet in half a dozen ballrooms. There was also the Arsenic Waltz, published in Punch magazine, which depicted skeletons dancing in green ball gowns, thereby showing that the dangers of arsenic were well known at the time. However, the high profitability of this endeavor led it to not be banned. The Arsenic Act of 1851 only required that sellers record who bought arsenic and not target its usage in household products. Economists and industrialists actively caution against any ban. Its usage would eventually decline when superior dyes coming from coal tar made their appearance in the twilight of the 19th century. By the 1900s, most countries would have banned or restricted it. The final irony being that the same chemical, Paris green, was later used as an insecticide to kill potato beetles and mosquitoes. The final realization and acceptance that this was not a colour to be trifled with, nor should it have ever been a conscious fashion decision in the first place. And now we move on to brown, which isn't the most exciting colour on any colour palette, but the way we did get it is possibly the most disturbing, at least mummy brown, which isn't a nickname, actual brown paint made from ground up remains of Egyptian mummies, which is also known as caput mortem, which is Latin for dead head, which tells you everything you need to know about it. The recipe was simple, taking one Egyptian mummy, not just the wrappings, but the flesh, the bones, and the resins, and even sometimes cats, which were mummified as well, and ground up into a powder, mixed with oil, and put in a tube. And this was A.O. by European artists of the Victorian era. Delacroix used it, the pre-Raphaelites loved it. It was a bestseller in Paris and London from the 1700s through to the 1800s. Artists prized it for things like glazing, shadows, flesh tones, the fact that it was warm, transparent, and unlike any brown they'd ever seen before. The painter Lawrence Alma-Tadema once visited his Cullman's workshop and saw an actual Egyptian mummy sitting in the corner, waiting to be crowned, and you would think nothing of this. But the best story perhaps belongs to Edward Burne-Jones. Burne-Jones had a tube of mummy brown in his studio, and he would use this regularly, and one day he was having lunch with friends, including Alma-Tadema, who mentioned that his colour man had a real mummy in the workshop. Burne-Jones would laugh at this. He thought Mummy Brown was just a name. When they told him it was real and actual human remains, he rushed back to his studio upon this realization, grabbing the tube and insisting on giving it a proper Christian burial. He dug a hole in his garden and buried the tube, and he planted a daisy root on top as a grave marker. And witness to this was his wife Georgina and her nephew, a young Rudyard Kipling, watching the whole thing, the actual author of the Jungle Book, a famed author of the Victorian era. So, somewhere in England, there's a daisy growing on top of a Victorian paint tube. Now, you may be asking, how long did this go on for? Well, the earliest record of Mummy Brown for sale is from a Parisian shop called A la Mummy, at the Mummy in 1712. And it was still being sold until 1964, which means a 250-year-old tradition. So why did it stop? Well, it wasn't for ethical reasons, nor was it for any reasons that they realized that digging up and grinding up corpses was morally wrong. They simply ran out of mummies. Today, a tube of real mummy brown sits in the Harvard Art Museums. It's a relic of a time when artists painted with the dead. Modern mummy brown is synthetic, purely iron oxides and clay, and there are no corpses required. At least I would hope there isn't any in the modern process. But every time you do see that warm, transparent brown in an old painting, you're looking at history. And that's mummy brown, is the color that comes from graves and dead bodies. There you have it. Those are the three colors. Red coming from a rock that would poison the miners, as well as anyone who came into contact with it. Green from a lab that poisoned the women who wore it. And brown that came from beyond the grave. Today, all three of these colors are made in a synthetic manner, safe, ethical, and no corpses or bodies required. But every time you see an old painting, maybe a red robe, a green dress, a warm brown shadow, remember that someone or something always paid for that color, not with money, but with their own lives. Thank you for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe, as well as comment down below. Much appreciated, and have a nice day.